everybody. I'm going to keep it very brief because we want maximum time for the Q&A after. But after this movie, we'll be speaking with Molly and Bobbie O'Steen, who I think most of you now are very familiar with because this is our third time having them here. There are it's an annual event. This is our third year, and they come back every time to talk about a movie that Sam O'Steen cut, who is was very near and dear to them, and they're an entertaining comedy duo full of knowledge and wisdom about this amazing movie and every movie that Sam worked on. So we're really looking forward to it. It's a 35 millimeter print, should be great, and we'll see you after.
Hi, I'm Molly O'Steen, and I am a writer, an educator, founder of Fair Play House, New York City, and I am here with the incredible Bobbie O'Steen, relation potential. She is a film historian whose goal is to shine the light on editors. She's done panels for years where she moderates and interviews master editors. She's taught at film schools. She's written several books, including Cut to the Chase, which is a book she wrote with Sam O'Steen, who edited this film, about his life in movies. She's also written The Invisible Cut, which if you've ever wanted to learn about how editors actually do what they do, how the sausage is made, is an incredible book. In her most recent book, Making the Cut at Pixar, about how Pixar revolutionized animation editing. Her late husband, Sam O'Steen, of course, edited this movie. And we're going to be...
Editors are writers.
Huh?
Editors are writers, too.
That's true.
Final writers.
That's true. That's a good point. So you met Sam a couple years after this came out, and what did you say to him?
I said, I loved the movie, but I hated the ending.
And
he
said, but you'll always remember it. Which is very true.
Undeniable.
This movie is such a beautiful homage to film noir in the 30s. The writer Robert Towne was from LA, and he loved noir movies, Raymond Chandler movies. The costumes, the decor. I mean, it's just such a gorgeous sepia-toned movie. I want to wear everything Jack Nicholson is wearing in this movie. But the story, among all this beauty, is complex. It's political. And in those senses, it's actually very much a 70s film in terms of the story and the characters.
You know, the political cynicism, I mean, this was not soon after Watergate. Actually, Watergate hearings, I think, were happening during shooting. Political corruption, we don't know anything about that. But
it's gone away, which is great.
Yeah. It's totally irrelevant to these times.
Eradicated.
But what was really interesting cinematically was that, and Polanski made a point about talking about this, was he used the expression, it was the camera eye of the 70s. So film noir movies from the 30s and 40s, you know, they were studio films. They were, the technology was such that, very different from the 70s. So the films were quite static and stagey, and so this was an era where the cameras were more portable, sound was also more portable, and film was faster. And what was interesting, to be very specific, is the Panaflex camera, which completely revolutionized cinematography. It only came out a year before this movie was shot, and it's used in this film. And so the fluid nature of the ability to do incredible handheld shots. You have no idea how much handheld film.
It's crazy.
Like that great scene where Escobar and Jack Nicholson, or Geddes we'll call him, is walking along the dam. They're walking along the dam. That's completely handheld. There's no tracking shots because you would see the tracks when they pull back. So stuff like that, it was just, the other thing is, regardless of the technology, Polanski, by nature, was incredible with the camera and very fluid and very probing and very innovative. So he still had that film style. It just sort of liberated him to make the most of what his talents were with that technology.
And editing this movie, I can only imagine what a challenge it is, because you have Evelyn's storyline, you have the water storyline, you have the way they intertwine, And then you have Jack Nicholson, Giddy's character arc. And I mean, every time I watch this movie, which I've watched it more times than is probably healthy, I actually have a tattoo for this movie if anyone wants to see it after. A little bonus. It's kind of hard to see from here. Don't worry, it's on my arm. The show's not that exciting. But his character arc is so fascinating, and it really is a movie about trauma. I mean, her trauma is obviously the most obvious, but the trauma of California's colonization, Giddy's trauma in Chinatown, the trauma that the city of Los Angeles was going through at this time post, the Manson murders, including Polanski specifically. So, for such a complicated movie, Polanski wanted Sam because he so valued Sam after their first movie together, which was, of course, Rosemary's Baby.
And what happened on Rosemary's Baby, it was a 4.5-hour cut that was botched by the previous editor, and Sam completely reconstructed it and cut it down to 2 hours and 11 minutes. And Polanski was actually not there at the time. He approved it, but he wasn't there, and so he completely recut it himself. And he said that Sam had a skill and imagination that took my breath away.
I mean, it's so bold. O'Steen gets this 4.5-hour cut. Polanski's out of town. He's like, I'm just going to recut the whole thing. But he was.
You want to tell the real story?
He was. Well, we don't have time for that. But
the producer actually said, "I'll give you a bonus if you do it while he's gone," and I said.
Producer's never done that, I'm sure. First time.
Sam said, "Okay, I'll just start cutting," and then halfway through the cut, Polanski came back and he said, "You want to see it? I got 6 reels." He said, "You cut my movie?" And he said, "Yeah. You want to see it?" And he watched the first 6 reels. He says, "Keep going."
Yeah, he would say about Sam is superb. This is a direct quote. He said, "He is superb. We argue all day. I go home, I sleep on it. I wake up and think, shit, Sam was right again." And this was very much their relationship as director and editor. And Sam said that Polanski loved to. He just loved to constantly run his dailies, as we were talking about. It's such a gorgeous movie. And so even though it was challenging in terms of the storyline and the plot, the actual looking at this footage was so gorgeous that he would just run it over and over again. And, since this was the first film where Polanski had to worry about a complicated plot and whether an audience would understand it, Sam would actually tell Polanski to stay away as much as possible. He had a philosophy that he learned from his mentor editor. Ooh, I just made up a word. Which is, if you pick at a sore, it'll never heal. But if you put it aside for a while, you'd be surprised how objective you'll be. Which I think is a pretty good lesson.
And actually, that's a great lesson for all artists, writers, anyone who gets, you get sort of stuck in something and you can't figure out whether it's good or not. And in this particular case, what was interesting about Polanski staying away as much as possible is because when a director runs their first cut with the editor, they either want to kill themselves or throw up or something because it's so painful to watch that first cut, and they're looking for technical problems or, oh, I did this wrong or whatever. And so particularly in this case, when this was the first movie Polanski ever had a complicated plot like this, it was really important that he stay away as much as possible so he didn't get distracted by those things and try to watch it as audience. Because the challenge of this movie is, you do see everything through Giddy's point of view. It's a very powerful thing when you have a point of view like that, a first-person point of view that's consistent throughout the movie. He's in every shot. But it's tricky because it's still just, as Molly said, it was a very complicated plot. And, that whole thing you have to kind of do, if you can't get ahead of the audience, you can't let the audience get behind the story, you have to get them just where you want them to be. And it was the most challenging thing. And I mean, Sam, at one point, I said, yeah, I never really understood the story. And then he laughed. He said, no, but it was complicated, yeah.
Sam had a very wicked sense of humor. If you ever read Cut to the Chase, which I recommend, it's a very entertaining but also informative book. When Polanski returned after he had finished cutting Chinatown, Polanski said, so what does it look like? And Sam goes, great, you won't recognize it. Which, of course, caused Polanski to panic in the moment. But once again, shit, Sam was right. Once he saw the cut, he saw that it was great. So, and despite all the challenges, Sam was very instinctive in terms of his editing. Like Bobbie was saying, having the pulse on what the audience needs so that they're not too far ahead, not too far behind. He says Polanski is so specific and artistic in his choices that his films kind of guide the editing for me. They tell me where to cut. He says, they really speak loudly to me, while maybe other films he's edited more whisper to him in terms of where to cut.
Yeah, he just said he was a master with the camera, and he said, I used to drool over his dailies. But his dailies were also challenging. He said it was kind of like a jigsaw puzzle I was putting together, because his camera was always moving, not always moving, but moving more than most directors, and traditionally directors shoot master shots, which is an all-inclusive shot with all the characters, the full scene, and Polanski never shot master shots. So when Sam would have to cut in on wider shots, the camera might start on a character and encompass the whole scene, but it would never just stay static. So it's tricky for an editor, because when he would have to cut in close, often because the camera was moving all the time, it's sort of like jumping into a moving car. But what it also does is it's like dominoes, so it's hard to recut. So it's possible that was also helped him not have studio interference, because it would be impossible to recut. And I asked him about that. I asked Polanski about it, and he said, oh no, I don't do it for that reason. But I wasn't totally convinced.
Added bonus, maybe.
It just added bonus.
Let's get a little gossipy now. That's always fun. As editors may tell you in secret, sometimes editing actors' performances can be a little challenging. Sam at times found editing Faye Dunaway to be a little challenging. Her nervousness obviously works really well for Evelyn, but also, her self-conscious mannerisms and stuttering sometimes made it difficult. And he said that sometimes she would give strange line readings, and there was one thing in particular that he kind of had to do an editing trick of because of her line reading.
And she said, you saw my father? Like, she did this weird, he said she used to give the weirdest line readings, and so he had to swap out her line, that particular line in that shot, which pre-digital was not that easy. Now it's much easier, but he said that a lot of it was that she had these self-conscious mannerisms and this nervous stuttering, and part of it was she was just a very nervous person, it was a kind of a difficult set for her, and she also forgot her lines a lot. So some of those hesitations were partly as a result of that. But he also said her nervousness, as you all witnessed, worked for the part, because her whole character is nervous all the time, this terrible secret on all the drama surrounding her. So she's incredible in it. The other thing another Sam saying is, which is great for editors to know, is when something's working, have the courage not to cut. And there are so many moments with both their performances, Jack Nicholson and Faye Dunaway's, that you really see their moments play out and all the nuances, which are so crucial in this movie and part of what makes it great.
Yeah, he was talking about specifically the restaurant scene where they meet, right? Also, he has another philosophy, which is cut for a reaction, not a line. So, and I was actually just talking to my sketch comedy students today about this, right? Who does the audience want to look at? And so in that restaurant scene, Evelyn's hiding something. So you don't really need to look at Jack Nicholson as much as her while he's asking the questions, because you're not as interested in him asking the questions as her reacting to the questions. And Sam said the first time he cut the scene, it wasn't really working because he was focusing too much on Jack Nicholson, and then he went, oh, cut for a reaction, not a line. And when he recut it and focused more on her and her reactions, all of a sudden the scene came together.
Yeah, he said, even though, as I said before, that the point of view was clearly Jack Nicholson's, Giddy's character, he said the hardest thing was just figuring out who to play these scenes on, that the crucial sort of cat and mouse game between the two of them, that, you know, the secret that she has, the peeling away the layers of all of that happened throughout the length of the movie, which is very unusual. So, and the strategy on who to favor, and as Molly said, cut for a reaction, not for a line, but also just sort of, there's so many moments where you just absolutely are dying to see, you know, one of the prime jobs of an editor is to have their finger on the audience's pulse. And they are audience. And talking about the objectivity that the director will never fully have because he's too involved in the story. And so knowing who the audience is dying to see in a moment is very crucial in this movie.
And also knowing where the audience wants to look, and also when to use a close-up. The way that obviously Polanski, the DP, and Sam use close-ups in this movie. If you notice, the only zooming close-up, which is like a whoop sweep close-up, is when she gives Giddies the address for Con. And at the time, you go, okay, I know that this address is important, but maybe I don't know why yet. And of course, you find out it's in Chinatown. So also doing little things like that, especially in a kind of a mystery movie like this, where you want to have the camera hint to the audience, this is important, even if the actors themselves haven't figured out it's important yet, is a huge technique to focus on.
Yeah, and so for example, that first scene where she wants to hire him, and he says, did you get married before or after your father sold the water department? That is such a crucial moment because there's so much in that sentence. And that was the first time in that entire scene where he cuts to a head-on close-up. And it's also a very tight cut, almost to the frame after he says that line. Because even though you don't know yet about her father and everything, it's telegraphing to the audience, pay attention to this moment.
And Sam also used to always say that movies are a story of arcs. So, for instance, in the confession scene, the my sister, my daughter, the famous scene, it's such a high energy, chaotic scene, so Sam has to be careful to actually give the audience beats to sit and absorb the information in the same way Giddies is absorbing the information. So there's this great moment where she's talking, and then the camera it cuts to Giddies, and he blows smoke out his nose, and it's this beat, and it's a beat for us all to go, oh, shit, we just learned this information. And same thing when he cuts to Khan on the staircase. You might say to yourself, why is he cutting to Khan on the staircase? Why is he staying on them in their conflict? But as an audience, we need those moments to absorb, and if everything is just like too fast-paced, then we get lost, and then once again, the finger is off the pulse of the audience.
So when she says, she's my sister and my daughter, you would think you would cut to Jack Nicholson, but to Giddies, but you don't. He doesn't. He cut to Khan coming down the stairs, and the reason why he did that is to give you a beat to absorb, and Giddies a beat, to absorb that information.
Yeah. We actually don't see Giddies' reaction for a while, which is kind of exciting, because the whole time you're like, what is he thinking? How is he reacting? And then when they finally show us Giddies, and he has this face of just...
Once again, saving the dead-on close-up, almost to the frame, cutting when she said, do you understand, or is this too hard for you? She's my, I'm sorry, she says, she's my sister and my father. Understand her? And it's like, that's when the full impact of it hits us and it hits Giddies. And saving close-ups is a really important strategy for an editor. You don't want to waste them because they have an incredible impact.
And then there's the ending. The original ending was a little happier, bittersweet, let's say, but Polanski said the world is too cynical, this is what would actually happen, which in 2025 I can't disagree with. But what's fascinating too about the ending is the whole movie, you're so in Giddy's perspective. So much you're even just over his shoulder, if you really notice. There's so much of this movie where you literally feel like you're just like right behind him. But then Polanski chose to do this kind of Deus Ex Machina crane shot at the end.
Yeah, so that was so when I was talking about this sort of 70s cinema, it was very naturalistic. And in fact, John Alonzo, the cinematographer, had a really strong documentary background. So when Molly was talking about the zoom in shot, one of the reasons why that was unusual is because it was artificial. And he didn't use zoom-in shots in that movie because that was not the style. So basically, the entire scene in Chinatown was shot very documentary style with handheld cameras. In this sense, even though I said before a lot of the handheld was imperceptible, in this case it wasn't. It was very much intentionally to be sort of frenetic. And then, you know, when his associate says, "Forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown," and there's, he told his cinematographer, he said, "I want this," and now this handheld camera, he wants him to back up and get up and go 27 feet high on a crane shot. And Alonzo said, "No, you can't do that because it's not the style of the movie. It's artificial." But he insisted, and I think it's so powerful because it's a coda. It's like operatic. It's also a tribute to old Hollywood, and it's so you can absorb the full tableau and tragedy of this whole sort of operatic ending, but it was not part of the style of the movie before that, and maybe for that reason it has more of a dramatic impact.
We're gonna tell one quick fun little story about Sam being right and Bob Evans being wrong. And then we'll take some questions from y'all if you have any. So speaking of music, Sam was actually the reason we have this amazing score by Jerry Goldsmith. The original composer was a friend of Roman's and Polanski's, and it wasn't really working with the movie, and Sam actually recommended Jerry Goldsmith. And Rob Evans said that it was, he said, "Oh, well, I went into the cutting room and, what did he say?"
Well, first of all, Robert Evans, the producer, said that he found Jerry Goldsmith. Not true. They had a terrible preview with that original score, this very avant-garde experimental score. And so Sam said, "How about Jerry Goldsmith?" And so he did this score in a matter of weeks, which is incredible. And then Sam was there for the scoring and the mixing. Polanski actually had committed to direct an opera in Spoleto, Italy, so he couldn't be there. So at that time, Robert Towne, the screenwriter, and Robert Evans, the producer, said they used that opportunity to go into the cutting room and make all the changes they had always wanted to make. And
yeah, exactly. That's the correct reaction.
And Sam said, "It's a lie. It never happened."
So just always trust the editor.
The editors know everything.
On that note, any questions? Yes.
Yeah, so
Hold on, bring you the mic.
Well,
okay, great.
you project really well, though.
Right? So the film we just watched, every moment seems intentional, like it could be nothing else, but obviously there were a lot of other possibilities and choices. Sam did such a great job, it just looked like there was only one movie. But I'm hoping that you guys have some clues or stories of some of the other choices he might have had and chose not to do.
Yeah, that's a great question. We do. I also, and I promise I'm not getting paid for this, I highly recommend reading The Big Goodbye by Sam Wasson, which is about the making of this movie. It's a beautiful, he's a wonderful author. He also wrote a book about Fosse that made me cry. What's fascinating is the original screenplay had all of these subplots and there were all these things. And so something Sam had to do was take footage that might be referencing those subplots while also not ruining the movie he's making. So for instance, in the original screenplay, the original story, she actually has an affair with Escobar. And so when she says something about in the restaurant having lovers, no, I don't see anyone for very long, that was actually kind of referencing that relationship with Escobar. So Sam had to make that line still work in the context of that scene, even though that storyline had been cut. So there's a million things like that because the original draft had all these different subplots and stuff. Yeah. And well, I'm happy to tell you more.
There were a lot of, the original screenplay had a lot of characters and a lot of subplots. It was massive and way too complicated. And Polanski actually should have gotten a screenwriting credit. He didn't care. But he did a tremendous amount of work of streamlining and restructuring it. So the challenge for Sam was there were a lot of little things like Molly described where they had to sort of, not every loop was closed, so to speak. So it was just a tricky thing to hope the audience just saw that as a moment and not question too much. If you really look under the hood a lot, you can find some little little confusing things.
There was also like a whole subplot with like Seabiscuit, and rewatching this, I was like, oh yeah, he is reading a lot about Seabiscuit. So once you learn about all those plots, you see them now. But it is amazing how Sam, just made it, like Bobbie said, not distracting. You just go, okay, that's kind of the part of the universe. It's part of the world. Any other questions?
I've got a question up here.
Yeah.
How many of the transitions, I'm thinking particularly of like the obvious ones, I'm wondering how many of the transitions were shot that way, on set, or crafted by Sam? Like, an obvious one would be the stopwatches underneath the tires, cutting from Biddy's setting there to cutting right back to them braking. Another sort of obvious one is like the racist joke that Giddy's hears, that we don't hear the entire joke in the barbershop, that he rushes into his office and recites it embarrassingly. I mean, those are like obvious ones, and yet, I'm wondering, what were those on the page? Were those Polanski? Were those Sam?
I think, honestly, that most of them were on the page, or actually, I would say more Polanski than on the page. Like for example, one of the great shots, if you recall, is Evelyn's house, and then the car pulls right in front of the camera, and then there's sort of a tilt over the hood of the car, and it's just this incredible transition. And that's Polanski. I mean, he was so incredibly specific. And this is why Sam said, I drool over his dailies, because even though they were a little bit of a can of worms, because as I said, there was so much constant motion, every angle, when he shot coverage of a scene, every shot was slightly different. He never repeated himself, which is actually really challenging for an editor, So if anything, he had too many ideas, you know what I mean? But in terms of just pre-visualizing, and like Sam said, one of the things he loved about Polanski was in his insert shots, or even like they had an argument, the shot through the binoculars. That's not realistic. If you look through binoculars, you don't see the whole framing, but it's so beautiful,
pretty. It's so pretty.
Yeah, it's so pretty. So one of the things he had kind of a reputation for, it's a little like Hitchcock in that he didn't really want to talk about motivation with his actors, just stand over there. No, a little to the left, 3 inches, go back. And it's not because he was being difficult. He had such specific pre-visualization of how he wanted a shot to be that it was very stressful because it was so ambitious and time was running out that he couldn't afford the time to talk about this stuff with the actors. And actors who really respected him. I mean, I was thinking about when Harrison Ford worked with him on Frantic. And he was such a huge fan of Polanski's that he didn't want to do 30 takes of walking up the stairs for no performance reason, just because. But he did it because that's what Polanski.
Yeah, that was actually Jack Nicholson on that fence, just being pummeled with water. So the things actors would
or the
do
knife,
for
the knife that slit his
God,
nose.
the knife,
So
yeah.
so by the way, that knife was invented for that movie, and it had a little hinge on. So if you flip the knife the wrong way, it would have cut his nose.
And Jack Nicholson really likes his nose. So
Yes,
he
likes breathing through it.
that scene where he's like hyper. I think that was a little method.
so,
acting.
so there was a little bulb of fake blood that squirted out of it, but it was just, it really would have cut his nose that badly or badly if the knife had been flipped. And, he asked him if he wouldn't mind doing the thing at the fence,
Yeah.
but because if it had been I don't know, I think it was so believable and wonderful, So actors understood. Some actors had problems with it, like Faye Dunaway, but
Yeah.
Jack Nicholson was game.
Any other last? We'll be in the lobby having drinks. If anyone wants to talk after. But any other questions? We're almost done.
Oh, and also, I just want to say, because I'm sure you all agree that Jack Nicholson was incredible in this movie. It was written for him.
Yeah.
So it was very, and what's interesting is it was an homage in a way to film noir, but it was different in the sense that, as I said, it was a different style of shooting, but also Faye Dunaway was not a classic femme fatale.
She's not in the end, she's not a femme fatale at all.
At all.
You think she's going to be, and then it's like, oh.
But Jack Nicholson, Giddy's character is not a typical film noir character. He's not Philip Marlowe exactly, or Double Indemnity, or he's more
Idealistic.
and a much better dresser.
Yeah.
And a smartass. I mean, he is like setting himself up all the time. This was not true of the original film noir lead male characters.
And that is our time. Thanks so much for staying, y'all.
Thank you.